Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is season 1, episode 5 of my podcast, which is called Bridging Generations with Howard Snooks. And I am Howard Snooks. And this is HaLevi, who is my guest for today. And I want to welcome you, B. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And the two of you there'll be two therapists on the show today because B is also a therapist, as am I. So, B, one of the things the reason I started this was I developed an interest in you call it bridging generations because I'm interested in how do people from one generation talk to one another? How is it authentic? Is it helpful? Is it something that can be harmful? Like just how does that work? And I got kind of inspired just because I worked at the University of Colorado for a while and really enjoyed talking with the students and stuff, and realized there are some challenges to it. Yeah. And so that's partly it. And I have at least 2 generations behind me now, at the age of 76. So even though you're, definitely a grown man and have grown children, I'm old enough to be your father. So this is one of the interesting things about talking about generations, I think.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my intro to this. And I've never met you before. I know your son, Yuda, but I don't know you. And maybe you could just fill me in a little bit about yourself.
Sure. It's an honor to be on your show. I'm really glad to participate in the conversation like this. It's so important. Maybe it's challenging to bridge the generations, but the blessings and the benefits far outweigh the challenges, as you know. So thank you for doing this work.
Sure.
I grew up in Nebraska.
Where in Nebraska?
In Omaha, Nebraska.
Omaha, all right.
So like 3rd generation there, maybe. My family came over from the old country, sort of a typical Jewish migration story. Ended up in Nebraska, where I was born, raised, and had a very tight-knit family community. So, I was privy to multi-generations. But then I also watched my family start to come undone as the generations moved on, as life got really messy. And eventually I moved away from home, went to University of Kansas, ended up in New York City, where I set out to be a motivational speaker and wasn't sure what that meant after college, but pretty soon realized that I was hungry for something deeper than just motivating people. Somebody once said to me, to motivate them to do what? I'm like, that's a good question. I don't know, just motivate them. And that's when I started looking into spirituality.
Oh.
And that's what I think was missing in my childhood and my family. I think could have held us together in a way that didn't. So I started studying Buddhism, Hinduism, other people's isms other than the one I grew up in, Judaism. And I started to wonder, why are all these, and I started meeting a lot of Jews doing other people's traditions, leading them. And I started wondering, why is it there's so many Jews doing Buddhism and Hinduism and other these traditions? And somebody said I needed to go to Israel and find my roots. And so I went there, and that's when I fell in love with my own tradition of my birth, Judaism, and started studying, eventually became a rabbi, and practiced as a rabbi for about 20 years.
And where did you practice?
Where did I practice?
Yeah.
Not too far from where you went to college, north of Boston, a place called Marblehead.
Marblehead, yeah.
So I was there for about 10 years.
Yeah, close to Topsfield. I had some ancestors from Topsfield.
They got the best fare, Topsfield.
The Topsfield fare, right.
So I set out to help repair on many levels, not the least of which was generationally, and did that for a long time, and realized that, as much as I loved being a rabbi and guiding people, I didn't like the politics, didn't like the parochial nature of just being stuck to one ism. So I decided to go back to school, got trained as a therapist, a pastoral counselor. That's what I was doing at the time. Got a doctoral degree in that. And then I went back later on and got trained as a logotherapist. The work of a man named Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
Probably know.
Yes.
And so I've been practicing as a logotherapist in general and a men's coach in particular for the past 10 years or so, guiding men to live more with more meaning and purpose. And in no small measure because of what I did or didn't get growing up. Again, had a tight family, but generationally was falling apart. Great-grandfather was pretty rough character, as many immigrants
Oh.
were. My grandfather didn't get the best of the parenting, passed down some brokenness to my father. And I just kind of watched what happens when you don't have that patriarch, that center of gravity in a family unit.
Hmm.
What's missing from a family in that sense. And so I set out to do some of that repair on my own, both personally and my own family, becoming that kind of man, and
Hmm.
then helping other men, rise up, take the reins of leadership in their homes, and guide them in a stronger way. And so that's what I do today. I help men just rise up. I say is to become good men, to become great men.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think of Omaha as a center for Judaism. Now, what would you is like you mentioned that your own family, that there were some broken pieces to
Yeah.
that. How about within the community, the Jewish community of Omaha?
Yeah, definitely not a hotbed for Judaism.
Right.
Huskers, not Judaism. And I was always sort of an outlier. Most of my friends were Christian. I just grew up with evangelical Christians, Catholics as my best friends.
Right.
So I was very comfortable in that world. As far as the Jewish world goes, it was culturally Jewish, not religiously, not spiritually. So I always felt, like my identity was Jewish, but my spirit didn't really know where to go or needed more guidance.
Hmm.
And so I had to leave my own tradition for a while to find it.
Hmm.
So I grew up in a very strong kind of, with a strong identity of who I was, but not necessarily the inner content to fill me up.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not Jewish, although people have often thought I was Jewish.
Therapist from Boulder? Come on, man.
I know. And when I was younger, I had, black curly hair. So I sort of like fit this
pass,
sort
huh?
of this. Yeah, I could pass as Jewish.
Yeah. So,
But I'm not. And do you know where Takema, Nebraska is? It's just north of Omaha. It's less than an hour away. It's just this very
I feel
small
like I
town.
should know.
But I had some ancestors that came from. I actually have a photograph of some of my great grandparents who came to. It was way before Omaha became a city. It was people came from Sioux City, Iowa. I think that was the
That was a big place.
original. It was a big place.
Yeah, I guess for me, a lot was lost in the translation of coming from the old country to this country. My great grandfather changed his name. It was Baruch, which is my name now.
Right.
And he changed it to Benjamin. He anglicized his last name to make it easier, threw away old world customs. And, it was in an attempt to assimilate, to blend in. I don't judge him. I can't know what it was like, what he confronted. However, I do know a lot was lost. And that, generationally, to the topic of your interest, we as human beings, and my passion is to help men. As men, we need these sort of tribal generational rhythms and patterns. And in many ways, for the first time in human history, I think we're bereft. We're without them, right? We're dependent on ourselves to figure this out. And it's been a passion of mine, is how do you reclaim some of those tribal rhythms, the connections to generations. I did get some of that on my mom's side from my grandfather, and I'm sure that'll be something we talk about, to feel like I'm connected to a generation that came before me and, in those tribes.
Well, tell me about it now. Your grandfather. What was your grandfather like?
So my maternal grandfather, his name was Jack Brody, and I called him Major Jack because he was a major in the United States Army. He served in World War II. I think he was like D-17, or he was pretty early on in right after D-Day. So he saw serious action, things he wouldn't or couldn't talk about later on. So he carried a tremendous wound, but a wound of a warrior, right? He gained it from service. Unlike my other grandfather, who was, he didn't serve in World War II for various reasons, health or whatever. And I just always looked to my grandpa, Major Jack, as sort of an example of what it means to be a man, to serve, to go beyond yourself, to give back. And I used to wear his army jacket, his helmet, play Major Jack. Wow. And so he's always been a moral compass for me in a world that sometimes is felt upside down, because on the other side of the equation, as I mentioned, my great grandfather, my grandfather, and my father, they all crumbled. in different ways.
Yeah, you've said that.
Yeah, my father ended up killing himself 19 years ago, and his mother
Wow.
killed herself 30 years prior to that. So a lot of
Wow.
brokenness on that side of the family. And this isn't, a woe is me story, because we're all given curses and blessings. And the blessing I got on the other side was Major Jack, who showed me another way, a way of virtue and morality.
And did they all live in Omaha? Major Jack and
Major
your
Jack
dad?
lived in Los Angeles. My
Uh,
mom grew up in Los Angeles. So he was from the Midwest, interestingly. He grew up in Centerville, Iowa. And he
hmm.
ended up moving to Los Angeles. But no, he was up until he died 15 years ago, and still is a major influence on me and my family.
I'm struck with what you said about he didn't say much about the war, because my father was a World War II veteran too.
Mm.
He would be 104 years old now if he were living, and he lived to be 93, so he had a good long life. But it wasn't until he turned 90 that I learned any stories really about this.
Wow.
And he was hit by a sniper in the left shoulder in the Battle of Remagen. He was crossing the bridge. That's a famous almost end of war battle, and he was struck by a sniper. So he always had this sort of shoulder wound, but it didn't bother him too much. But you can see it was quite a scar.
Mm.
But I never heard a thing about his life and as a soldier. He was a PFC. He was not a major. And he came late because he had what they call an agricultural deferment. He was working on my grandparents' ranch. And so he didn't enter into the war until 1944.
Wow. Yeah, it's, partially that generation, as you know, a much more stoic generation, not necessarily taught or shown how to emote, feel their feelings. I imagine that's partially an interesting story for you since you became a therapist, right?
Yes.
So I don't judge them too harshly, but it's hard because I needed more. I wanted to hear the stories more than the stories. We need these teachings, these from our elders. And as much as I love Major Jack, and he was the best of what my family had to offer, still few and far between of the stories, the sharing, the taking me under the wing and formally introducing me to manhood and what that means.
And he lived in LA and you lived in Omaha.
Yeah, and there was that distance. We would go out there quite a bit, and he would come to visit us.
Yeah.
But I needed more, didn't get more, but I got the best of what he had to offer, and that was a lot. Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, how about Grandma Jack? Was
my grandma?
Yeah.
Her name was Flo, Grandma Flo. She was an amazing sort of behind the scenes woman. As a teacher of mine once said, he wears the pants, his wife picks out which pair, right? And that's how it was in my family. My Grandpa Jack was sort of the authority figure, but my Grandma Flo was pulling the strings behind the curtains. So she was a very strong and powerful presence. She was joy, like just a joyful presence.
Huh.
She's just a joyful human being. It showed me and my family what it means to not only, provide and contribute, but also how to live joyfully, live your best life.
Well, the reason I asked that was I was thinking as you're talking about the need for men to have men as mentors and as role models and stuff. And I was wondering about the place for women in that and how you think about that. Yeah.
I guess for me, it's a little more of a given because, my mom has been this matriarch of our family, sort of the backbone after my father's tumult and ultimately suicide, my grandma on that side. And the women I know in my family, and relatively speaking, I was a rabbi, 80% of my constituents tended to be women.
Right.
Disproportionately, maybe it was 60, 70%, but it was more women than men. So I've just seen women show up more, particularly of a previous generation. It shouldn't go without saying, but maybe I did go without saying that I think men need a little more indoctrination, a little more teaching, demonstration of how to take on these roles. That's been my experience.
Okay. And the teaching should come from men in addition to women, but the teaching needs to come from men as well.
I mean, my grandmother certainly taught me what it means to be a woman from, as a man watching and bearing witness. But, only my grandfather could teach me how to be a man. He was a man and I needed him. I needed my father in particular to really show me. And my father checked out, he left us. And so now we got to figure it out on our own. And again, I don't say this as woe as me more than I just committed a long time ago to making sure that my children in general, my sons in particular, will not have to deal with a father who checks out either literally or even figuratively. You know, can you show up? Can you articulate what's going on inside of you as a man and share it with those who are coming after you? It's not easy.
How many children do you have?
Let me think. Can't do this without my phone. 4. I have 4 kids. Yeah.
And is Yuda the son I know? Is he your eldest?
He is my firstborn, and he is he's my oldest and my son. I have 2 boys and 2 girls.
And so because Yuda's in his early 20s, so your children are still growing.
Yeah, they're coming into their own. Yuda's, in masculine development work, I would say I've been taught there's sort of 4 ages of development. There's the page, the knight, the prince, the king. I'd say he's in knighthood, that conquest and go out in the world, but he's shifting into the prince, settling down.
Well, that's interesting. Finding
his princess, putting down roots, serving, and I'm watching him move into that space.
Wow.
And he pointed out to me that he's moving into the prince space. I'm moving into, I think I'm in the king space, and my youngest is moving into the knight space. So we got 3 sort of masculine male development roles going on simultaneously. That was his insight. Yeah.
Yeah. That keeps you hopping.
Keeps us hopping.
Now, Viktor Frankl. This is not a Viktor Frankl concept, I don't think, is it?
This is not.
Right.
His was not really focused on masculine, feminine, but.
But what about Viktor Frankl? He's an important figure in social work circles as well. But just.
Yeah. So interestingly, Major Jack gave me a book when I was 18, 19, going off to college, called Man's Search for Meaning, which I'm sure you've heard of. Many people have. And I think it was named as the top 10 most important books of the 20th century by the Library of Congress. He actually wrote 38 other books. Most people don't realize that was the one that went viral, if you will. But a very important book about how to find your way in life. And he boiled it down, quoting Nietzsche, "He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how." If you have a why, if you have a purpose, you have what you need to navigate life's, storms. And I think my grandfather saw what was happening to my father.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he was not a big fan of my father.
Wow.
I think he saw the selfish nature of my father. God loved him. He had many wonderful qualities, but he was a bit self-absorbed, which, suicide is the culmination of that. And I think he handed this to me in some way as a preemptive measure. I wasn't ready for the book. I took it with me. Eventually it caught up to me and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with, more importantly, the man who wrote the book, because as great of a psychiatrist and neurologist as Frankl was, I think his real contribution was that it was a lived experience of what he taught out of the Holocaust. Correct. If you have a why, you can endure any how is a very different message coming out of Auschwitz than it is from Harvard writing a book there.
Correct.
Right. And so his example proved the most worthy aspect for me to emulate this man. If he can do it going through what he's going through, I can do it what I'm going through. And I always say he's been my teacher and my mentor. And people's number one question afterwards, so you met him? No, but most of my teachers and mentors I actually never physically met. I met them in the pages, and I met them, him in this case, in the formal study of logotherapy. But he has become almost a mythological figure for me to lean on to help me get through tough times.
And so the why is what you're talking about. This, just talk a little bit more about that, because that just seems like that's such a rich area to discuss.
Sure. Logos means meaning. And it's the centrality of life from a logotherapeutic perspective. And as you know, as a therapist, therapia comes from Greek, which means healing. So it's healing through meaning, right? And when you have meaning, you can heal. My father's suicide, my grandmother's suicide was obviously tragic, but it was not meaningless. I spent a long time digging for meaning in the ashes of my father's demise. And it's become ultimately meaningful. I'm so grateful for his suicide. Would I trade everything I've discovered since then to have him back? Yes. But Howard, that's not the choice.
Right.
Either it's meaningless or it's meaningful.
Right.
And what I have found is, because of my father's suicide, not in spite of, because of, I have been able to go into the darkness, to find my meaning, discover it, take it out. The Kabbalists call this pulling out the sparks, turning them into a flame, carrying the flame, guarding it, turning it into a fire, carrying the fire to illuminate the path for other men, for myself, for my sons. I wouldn't have discovered that without this. I shouldn't say that. I may have discovered it without this, but I definitely discovered it in this. And that's how you turn meaning into something that can be a healing force in your life.
Now, if my math is correct, you were in your early 30s when this happened. Is that right? Do you mind talking a little bit about that, like just what actually happened?
Sure. No, I live for it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Sure.
I have a book coming out on this topic, by the way.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Get you a copy. And I begin by telling his story. And his story was a stereotypical success story. You know, had the wife, the house, the white picket fence, blah, blah, blah. As they say, climbed the ladder of success to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. He wasn't happy. He checked all the boxes. He got there. He had the business. He had the et cetera. But he didn't have internally a spirit, a source, a connection, whatever you want to call it, a God. And I watched a man just start to descend, throwing away his marriage, his friendships, his business, and ultimately throwing away his life. And I guess, my book begins with juxtaposing that versus a Viktor Frankl. And Frankl's not the only one. There are many great men and women, but he's my reference point. And then you watch a man like Frankl. His wife was murdered. His unborn child was murdered. His family, his friends. He's stripped of his title, his possessions, his profession. He spent 3.5 years in a concentration camp, and yet he had everything. He said, I have everything because I have what he called the defiant power of the human spirit. They can't take that from me. So I watched a man who seemingly had everything have nothing, and a man who seemingly had nothing have everything. And I said, I want to be like this man. I love my father. I love him too much to follow in his footsteps. I am going to live my life discovering meaning, purpose, my why, and sharing it with others. And that has turned out to be helping other men discover and live their why, their purpose. And whatever's going on externally outside of you, circumstances, it doesn't matter. When a man or a woman has their why, they can endure anyhow.
Could I ask some details about your father's suicide? Was it a surprise?
Unfortunately, it wasn't. It's interesting. As a therapist, you can relate. People's number one reaction was they want to know, he was mentally ill, right? They want to make sure he was mentally ill. It somehow puts a bow on it. Right. They can put it in a container. Right. My grandmother was, by every standard, mentally ill. She lived at a time, 50s, 60s, into the 70s, where she had serious electroshock treatment. I mean, they fried her brain. This was the time of lobotomies even. And she was not the same woman, at least as I was told, that she was as a younger woman. So when she killed herself, it was a logical conclusion. And I wouldn't say it was a blessing, but it certainly was, it brought her tortured soul to a place of peace. My father, I won't let him off the hook that easily. I was just on a podcast. Somebody said, but aren't you holding him accountable? Aren't you judging him? Absolutely. I judge people I love. Right? That's what we do. We hold them accountable. And I know on the other side, he's grateful that I'm not letting him off the hook by saying, well, he was mentally ill. No, he chose a series of bad choices, one after the other. And I don't think it was a one and done. It started with a bad decision here and another one there, and compounding and cutting people out of his life and throwing it away slowly, so that when he killed his life, that was just the culmination of lots of choices. Because again, as a logotherapist, choice is everything. Frankl's entire worldview is around the idea that this is the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. My father forfeited his right to choose. And so ultimately he did lose himself in mental illness and didn't take his meds and all of that. But he threw away choices and he didn't want to take responsibility. When I found him, almost literally,
you found him.
I did not find him. Sorry. When my grandmother killed herself, he found her. And then I was the fourth person on the scene. So that was, kind of a indirect finding. When it came to my father, I didn't find him. My stepmother found him, but I went there the next day and I went to his room and I saw the noose and I saw all of that. But I also saw the mess that he left behind financially, right? He left a mountain of debt. And at the end of the day,
Huh.
he killed himself over money. He didn't know, he was
Wow.
60 years old. He didn't know how to reinvent himself. And so he just didn't take responsibility for cleaning up his life each and every step of the way. And it might have been as simple as, hey, son, I need some help. Hey, friend, I need some help, right? But he chose not to make those calls and reach out. And so was it a surprise? On one hand, it was a surprise. On the other hand, I watched him not take responsibility for his life for a very long time. So when I got that call, I wasn't shocked. I was surprised though.
So there's kind of maybe not a totally conscious thought, but there's like, my dad's at risk for killing himself here. That had happened before he ever died.
Yeah.
Would you say that?
And I even said to him maybe a few years prior to that, you're going to kill yourself, aren't you? Because he was down and he was out. He said, I never
You
will kill
said
myself.
that to him.
Yeah, I'm a shit disturber, my friend. And so I just said the hard things in my family. You know, grew up in a time when nobody would talk about divorce except 6 out of my 7 aunts and uncles were divorced. Nobody would talk about being gay except my cousin was gay. And he kept coming with his friend. I'm like, why can't we just say the thing? Have the hard conversations. Well, that's how my father was. He didn't want to have the hard conversations. And I confronted him over this many years earlier. And he got so angry with me for bringing it up. How dare you?
He got angry.
He got angry at me. He said, how dare you, say that to me? My mother, your grandmother killed herself. I would never do that to you. Well, lo and behold, he did.
Was it a violent?
It was very violent. He hung himself and he did it in front of a mirror. And that's sort of the thesis of my book. It's called The Guy in the Glass.
I see.
And I can't think, Howard, of a more degrading way to leave this world than to hang yourself, because his neck, I hope this isn't too graphic, but you asked the question. His neck didn't break, and asphyxiation takes anywhere up to 30 minutes for brain death. So that means for 30 minutes, he was hanging and looking at himself in a mirror, and it broke my heart. It broke my heart that he killed himself, obviously. But as I say in my book, but that's not the man I knew and loved. How could he do that to that man? That was a good man. And I was angry at this version of my father for murdering that version of my father. And the way he did it, no man deserves to die that way. So it was extremely painful. And I wrote this book because I want to help men be able to, I know I'm saying a lot. Let me just pause. The book is built on a poem by a man named Dale Wimbrough, who in 1934 wrote a poem called The Guy in the Glass. And it's of that generation of your father and my grandfather. And it's about being an upstanding, moral man with a compass and going to the glass, the mirror, and learning to respect the man staring back. And it always broke my heart, Howard, that my dad didn't respect the guy staring back, because the people around him, including myself, respected him.
What about the fact that he knew that someone would find him, and it was probably your stepmother who was going to find him? What do you think about that?
So selfish. And also doing it in the house, which you bring down the resale value. I mean, there's all kinds of practical implications. You got to disclose this. Like go to a mountaintop, right? Disappear if you have to. I don't condone it. I think suicide almost under most circumstances is causes more problems than answers that it solves. But the bottom line was, on every level, it's a selfish act, right? I mean, just the statistic that his children are now 4 times more likely, I think, than the average Joe to kill themselves if a parent kills themselves. And that's one generation.
For years, I was into genealogy because there's this mystery, I once asked my mother, well, where did our family originally come from? And she said, well, they just always have been here. Well, that can't be true.
It's like the biblical answer.
And so I did some study of my great-great-great-grandfather came to Boulder in 1859. And he was there he got himself settled. Chief Niwot gave him the land that his ranch was. He came to be a gold miner. There's this Wisconsin Gold Mining Company, it's called. But then he went back and got his wife and his first daughter, who was my great-great-grandmother. And he became a very prominent man in that area, of ranching. And then he moved to he moved to a different Fort Morgan, a different town. And very soon after that, in the obituary, it says, well, he had a heat stroke, and then he was not doing pretty well. And he and his son were walking around the ranch, and he took out a penknife and stabbed himself in the belly, and it killed him. He died of peritonitis. And I guess that just sounds like the weirdest suicide story there ever was. But I don't know what else could have happened unless his son killed him. I don't know what happened.
Either way, it's tragic.
It's a tragic. And so I was telling my father about this because it was his great-great-grandfather. Well, he acted like, he says, I knew they lived up by Longmont somewhere. That's all he knew. But before he died, he says, he killed himself. So he knew that his great-great-grandfather had killed himself. Well, this great-great-grandfather, my great-great-grandmother moved to the southwestern Colorado, but one of their son, his youngest son, became a state legislator and became a very prominent person in Denver politics and was in line for being considered lieutenant governor on the way to being a governor. But he was involved in this gold mining scandal. And when he got found out, he was on trial and found guilty. In addition, his wife was divorcing him, and he was fighting for custody of his son. And she divorced him, and he lost custody of his son. And so it was headline news of this suicide because he was at a hotel, and he called his attorney. It was a day that he lost custody. He called his attorney. He says, I have just drunk poison. You can find me in room so-and-so. I don't think it was the Brown Palace, but it was some major hotel at the time. So there, just what you said, he committed suicide as well. And my father was too ashamed to tell me that his great-great-grandfather had killed himself, although he knew that had happened.
Yeah, there's a saying, if you can't name it, you can't tame it.
Yeah.
Right? You got to be able to give voice to these things, talk about them. And that's how you heal this process. And, the previous generations, my mom just told me like a couple months ago, oh, by the way, I think your paternal great grandfather also killed himself. Like, what? Like, that's 3 generations prior to me.
Really?
I wasn't sure it was a penknife kind of scenario where it's murmurings.
Yeah.
But the fact that we don't know is how you perpetuate any illness, any brokenness, any darkness. And so these conversations, right, is how I believe you heal generationally. And I'm very interested in, especially your topic and the area you're taking on. How do you heal generations, both living and dead? Because I believe you can still heal the dead, and there are ramifications for doing this work.
Say more about that.
In the Kabbalistic Jewish mystical tradition, there's this idea called Lador Vador, from generation to generation. And most Jews think of it as sort of a kitschy little phrase, and you pass the Torah at the bar mitzvah, and it's a symbolic grandpa to parent to whatever. It's spiritual, right? Because we inherit the flesh suit, we inherit the emotional, algorithms, we inherit spiritual aspects. All of those are passed down through the lines. And I believe, I guess you would have to believe this, but if there is a spiritual element to us that is also passed down, just like we have a fingerprint, we have a soul print, and it comes from somewhere. And then if we're doing our work and our healing, I believe we're healing ourselves. I believe we're healing those who come after us. But I also believe retroactively, we're healing the brokenness that came before us. Perfect example, the Holocaust. Right? How many people do I know who are carrying the trauma of their parents and their grandparents who have come to me, and their parents, for instance, if your parent or grandparent was in the Holocaust, you're like 10 times as likely to have an eating disorder. So I've worked with a lot of women in the past particularly who have had eating disorders and who had parents or grandparents who were Holocaust survivors. Their parents or grandparents unwittingly passed down to them so much fear, scarcity around, in this case, food, right?
Yeah.
The devastation that can wreak on somebody's life.
Yeah.
The parent or grandparent passes on. The generation that's still here is working through it, is healing their life. I believe as they heal, there's a forgiveness that happens. There's a healing that happens, that the parent is somehow released karmically, energetically, because no parent wants to knowingly, wittingly pass down brokenness to their children. They were doing the best they could.
Right.
Take my father, him killing himself, me doing this work of healing, making sure I stay alive and my children can go farther than all of us, I believe in no small way releases my father from a karmic debt, from a spiritual entanglement in this world. And so it gives me that much more impetus to do this work.
Wow. So, like, it really has got you. Like, it really, that ritual that some people just think is, I don't know, nothing. It
Symbolic,
really moves you so incredibly.
It gives ultimate purpose.
Yeah.
Right. Viktor Frankl, another thesis of Frankl's, and he and Maslow, or Abraham Maslow, would argue about this. Of course, Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs, the very top one, self-actualization. And Frankl would say to him, because they were contemporaries, "You're wrong, Abe, right? On this one. You're a brilliant man, you're wrong on this one. The top can't be self-actualization. To be the best version of me, it must be self-transcendence. We must exist for something larger than the organism, than ourself. It can be a person, it can be a cause. It doesn't matter what it is. But when I think of generational import, whether it's behind me, those who I carry, I call it carrying their fire, their legacy, or those whom I'm passing it on to, right? That gives me an ultimate purpose or ultimate self-transcendence that to me makes life worth living.
Meaning.
Yeah.
The meaning.
The meaning.
Well, I was trained in more of a psychodynamic tradition where the term hermeneutics comes up, which is, kind of the meaning of meanings, or I guess you could say. And another term that is used in terms of I can't remember what term you're using, but it's the connection. Cathexis is the term that's used, which I think is borrowed from electrical engineering, but it means sort of a live dynamic connection. And that's what gives a person meaning. Freud's famous statement, the ability to work and to love is how you, determine mental health. But Absolutely. It has to do with that connection, the cathexis, and what meaning you assign to those things.
Yeah, and serving others, whatever it could be, a partner, children, family, community, country. It doesn't matter what. We have a service epidemic. Like nobody knows how or where or what to serve. I see it. I coach and counsel, middle-aged men who they're just chasing decimals on the screen and another one and another one. There's nothing wrong with money, right? But as I was taught a long time ago, that's why it's called a means, not an end. It's a means.
Well, let me tell you how I got into social work then, because this is interesting, especially related to your grandmother. I went to CSU undergraduate, and I decided I was going to move to New England because I had a fifth grade teacher who was from Maine, and his stories he told of New England just sounded so great. So that is actually how I ended there. Wow. And I ended up living in Boston and got a job at a private psychiatric facility in suburban Boston. Well, I didn't know at the time, but all they did there was shock treatment. And we're talking 1973, so kind of your grandmother's era. And I found out it was privately owned by these Irish psychiatrists. They were all brothers. I think there were 4 brothers or 3 brothers and a cousin or something like that. And it was hidden away. It was this very posh suburb of Boston. And there were 3 mansions just right next to each other, but there's no sign outside or anything, and no one could ever tell. There wasn't loud wailing and stuff, coming out of the house. But all they did was shock treatment and lobotomies.
It's hard to believe that was in our lifetime. You.
And they were saying, look at the progress we've made. We use singulotomies now. We only do one side of the lobe instead of both. But I'll tell you this: it's not like I actually think there's something intrinsically wrong with every form of shock treatment, but this was a hospital where blue-blooded New Englanders would send their troubled family members. So they didn't want to bother with them. And they were in there for months. And people really aren't the same after shock treatment. I think they can't, I'm not going to say that completely, but they would have these, then there's unipolar shot, one-sided and double-sided. If you're double-sided, you lose your personality for a while. You get it back. But I realized that I guess your grandmother got nothing helped her, is what happened.
Yeah, by the time she killed herself, she was just a shell of a human being, and so she had checked out long before she physically left.
Wow.
That wasn't my father's story, but the bottom line to me is that we live in a society and in an era that wants quick fixes, that wants perfection, right? That wants the shiny, perfect, polished kind of whatever. And I think we need to embrace a little more of the messiness. People are messy, right? I can't be, my wife will tell you, I can't be perfectly polished. I'll never will be. I'm perfectly imperfect. And we got to find ways to embrace some of that messiness and I don't know, zoom out, see a bigger picture. And that's one of the reasons why I missed and I love my grandfather's generation, your father's generation. They had a slowness. They had a slow and steady wins the race, right? They just had my grandfather was always good at the big picture, kind of reminding me what it's all about. And so coming back full circle to this is I think we're missing a lot of that. And I'm just so grateful you're helping people tell the stories of generations.
Well, Generation Z, there's a lot of worry about Generation Z. These young guys, I guess I get confused about which generation it is.
But we ran out of alphabet letters.
I know.
Z, I don't know.
I know.
Start over.
But, these guys who they don't ever really get it together to have, they don't find an occupation. They don't find someone to love. They play games. They do find a job, but they just go home. There's just something missing in their lives. And there's a lot of concern about this. And that certainly is what piqued my interest in, generations.
There's a metaphor for that that I've heard in Israel. I'm Israeli, and I'm also American. And in Israel, have you ever been to Israel?
I haven't.
You'll go visit. You'll see all the Roman arches, right? You've seen Roman arches, and they start to crumble. They're 2,000 years old. And so how do they strengthen the arches? They put pressure on top, right? Because what's happening is it's not enough pressure. It's not enough tension. And so it needs more, not less. And that's my metaphor for the Generation Z problem, or anybody has a meaning problem. They need more, not less pressure, right? So when my son, Yehuda, graduated, I said, I love you. You will never be living on our couch. Just know that now. It's not an option. Like, you might be sleeping outside on the street corner. You will not, you have no return here. I love him too much to give him refuge into ending up on the couch. And he wasn't that kid anyways. And I didn't really need to say that. He's a go-getter. But I counsel a lot of people whose children need more, not less, of the good pressure, not the bullshit kind. But the healthy
I'll finish the story then about the shock treatment hospital, because this is interesting. Excuse me. I became a spy for the Department of Mental Health when I was working at the hospital, because
sounds like a novel. You got to write that.
Right. It was right when the Patients' Rights Bill came, and Massachusetts was one of the first states to. So there are all these rights that psychiatric patients had that they didn't have previously, which was the ability to refuse treatment, and the ability to sign themselves out, the ability to have contact with people outside, because these people were not permitted to. And so one day there came this pounding on the door, and it was this task force from the Department of Mental Health on the hospital. And so they entered, went to patients' records, talked to patients, and they kind of figured out that who was the spy just based on, who they went to and what stories they had.
Wow. And
so I got fired from the job. But they also had cleaned up their act, and it no longer functions as a hospital. I don't really know what happened, but it did kind of break me. It was really rough. And so I went back and stayed at my parents' home for 3 months. I was 22, I guess, at that time, but I had nowhere else to go. So I did go. And one thing I remember is they had me put a new roof on the house. She re-shingled the house.
So you worked for it.
I worked for it.
All right, but that's different.
And then I got a job working as an EMT up. They had moved to Farmington, New Mexico at that time, but I moved back to my hometown of Durango and worked as an EMT until I got accepted in graduate school at Smith College. So I went and started in '73 at Smith. So it's how I got into my social work
Your
career.
parents sound wise, right? Because to me, that's a
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
And I just counseled somebody whose kid is 23, smoking dope, playing Xbox on the couch. I'm like, that's a you problem, not a them problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Shouldn't have that opportunity, but that's for them to decide.
Yeah. But your position, you're taking a tough stance, I guess you would say, a tough love kind of approach is what they used to say.
I would say, and I get it from a previous generation. I get it from the
Mhm.
greatest generation. I think we're missing resilience.
That's a
Frankl,
great way to think about it.
Yeah,
Resilience. What's happened to
resilience.
resilience?
Right? I mean, Viktor Frankl after the war wasn't going to go, well, he didn't have parents, they were murdered, but he wasn't going to go back and retreat. He had purpose, he had a why, right? And this is where coming back to service, like I think coming from Israel, everybody serves in the military.
Mhm.
Most people serve, no,
Right.
but most do, and it's a given. And there's a maturity, interesting, weird anecdote, but you're in CU Boulder. My kids went through the fraternal system there, right? Fraternity, sororities,
Yeah.
the Greek system. There's no such thing in Israel. Why? Because the kids go to university after the military. And if you've gone to the military first, you have a deeper respect for this thing called university and education, and you don't need to fill your time with these childhood games. And we're missing a purpose. Like we need more service, whatever. Maybe it's not military. You just hung up with somebody literally whose kid is going to the Peace Corps. I'm glad it's still a thing.
Mhm.
2 years of their life to
Mhm.
serve, to transcend themselves.
Mhm.
I think the more we can get back to these basic principles of previous generations and learn from them, I think the better off we're going to be.
I was a member of this thing called the Service Corps, which wasn't as extensive as a commitment as the
Mhm.
Peace Corps, but it had to do with mental health careers. It was
Mhm.
encouraging people to go to mental health careers. So in between my junior and senior years at CSU, I did go to this state hospital in Norwich,
Wow.
Connecticut.
That's amazing.
And we got college credit for it. I think we got paid a little bit of money. But the whole idea was to encourage people in, this was the era of the Great Society. And so they wanted people to go into, nowadays, think of the loans you have to take over, to
Yeah.
make it through grad school.
It's complicated for sure, but
It is.
there's a lot for us to learn from previous generations. And I think, your point of there's lots of knowledge. I'm not sure there's a lot of wisdom, and we got to really make sure there's enough wisdom, not just knowledge.
That fraternity sorority thing is interesting because when I graduated in '67 from high school. And so that year, fraternities and sororities became totally uncool. Nobody was joining them. And I would just wonder what would have happened if I'd been a fraternity member instead of, part of the Woodstock generation.
I don't know. They have their place. They all have their place. I'm not. I let my kids do it. I went through it. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I just know that we have a meaning challenge in this world right now. People are hungry for meaning, and we got to find ways to help them discover it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you have a very clear message. You've thought about this, and you really have a lot of substance behind your approach. And it doesn't have inconsistencies. It doesn't sound like to me.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. I don't ever want anybody to agree with everything I say. I don't agree with everything I say, but I do want to be consistent. I want to be clear, and we can agree to disagree, and that's part of the deal. And I think partially I've just learned from a lot of failure and falling down, and getting up again.
Well, the last question, because we're getting close to the end, is how about pushback from your kids? When, God, Dad, you're being so tough on me. Like, lighten up some. Does that ever happen? Did that ever happen?
It hasn't happened since yesterday. It's true. I teach this personality typing system called the Enneagram.
Oh, I know it. I'm a 7.
7. I can see it. You just smile a lot. So I knew you were 7.
Yeah.
That's the enthusiast, the joyful one. I'm an 8, challenger. My wife will say on a good day I'm a challenger, on a bad day I'm an 8-hole. So I got to stand guard against it. I'm fiery and, angry underneath it, but I've learned how to harness it for a greater good. But we are who we are, and it slips out. And I've been doing a lot of spiritual and alternative forms of exploration, like plant medicine, to soften my edges.
Mhm.
And my kids have noticed, and they've said, whatever you're doing, keep doing that, because you're a lot
And
softer version of yourself.
I mean, that's interesting what you're saying about people. We are who we are. It's not like an 8 is a bad number to be. It's just that it has to be the best developed. It, you know,
We need them all. We have
yeah.
all the energies inside
Yeah.
of us. But yeah, I mean, think about Martin Luther King was an 8.
Yeah.
I mean, I Have a Dream was not given by
Right.
an Enneagram 9 peacemaker. It was fire
Right.
and brimstone.
Right.
And people seem to have resonated with it. So it has its time and its place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
B, so glad to have met you.
Pleasure.
And I do hope I get invited to be on one of your podcasts.
You're invited.
All
and
right.
I think you know the way to the studio. So
I know my way.
we'll meet there.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.